If you are watching, say. Okay, we should be live. If you're watching, say hi. Let me get another phone. Are we live on Facebook? I'll go run and get the other. We're not running away, my friends. Don't get worried. I think we got another. Find me on Facebook. It shows live. It doesn't show me if I wasn't there, but now it shows. Okay, we're live. So we're going to start a beautiful class. Make a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihiyeh b'dvaro. Okay, and I see the comments on Chabad.org. Lori is on with us. Good evening, and Art is on. Shavua Tov. Okay, so if we got our regulars, and, yeah, Marsha says good evening. Corinne says good evening. Everyone's watching there. I don't know how far is Atlantic Springs. 100 yards. They're watching from 100 yards away. Okay, it's fine. I know it's raining outside. It's bad weather, so we're with you in spirit. So let us begin a fascinating conversation that we're in the middle of discussing, the 10 tribes of Israel, right? Now, it's very much connected to the theme of this week's Torah reading as much as it was connected to the theme of last week's Torah reading. We talked at length, but I wanted to give a little introduction because it's even though it's not like our typical in the Bible Parsha class, this is very much connected to the theme of the Parsha. The Parsha, the Torah reading, very much talks about the unique role of each of the 12 tribes of Israel. We saw this last week in the way the Jews traveled, in the census of the Jewish people, where instead of God just doing a census of all 12 tribes in total and saying the 603,550 Jews, this is the total for the army, there was repeated multiple verses for each and every one of the 12 tribes, describing the leader of the tribe, describing the census of each one of those tribes, the men from the ages of 20 and over, etc., with the number of each of those tribes until you get to the total of all 12 tribes. In addition, when the Jews traveled, they had to travel, each tribe independently with their own flag on their own side of the Mishkan. They couldn't just travel as the Jewish people. They each traveled in their own camp with their own flag. In this week's Parsha, the Parsha of Nasa, we're going to read about how on the first day of Nisan, the Mishkan was inaugurated. One of the great, exciting moments of Jewish history. 1 year after the Jews had left Egypt, 6 months after the sin of more like 9 months after the sin of the golden calf, and then 6 months after God had forgiven the Jewish people on Yom Kippur and said to us that I will forgive you. Nasa, make a new Mishkan, make a home for me, and I will dwell in the home of God. And finally, after months of separation between the Jewish people and God, when we finally inaugurate the Mishkan, and God's presence comes down into the temple, into the Mishkan, and they see the fire coming down from heaven, and they feel that once again, God has become present and is found amongst the Jewish people. The celebration is tremendous. The joy, the happiness of knowing that they've been forgiven for the sin of the golden calf, and that finally God is going to be present amongst the Jewish people, where we'll have a place where we can come to the Mishkan and we can pray to God and talk to God and connect to God. Tremendous celebration. So on that day, each one of the 12 princes of the tribes of Israel decide they want to bring a special offering of thanks on behalf of their tribe as an inauguration offering to express the joy and the celebration that they feel having a Mishkan, having a home where God's presence can be found. What happens? God tells Moshe not to do it all in one day, because then it becomes like one lump of each one of the princes, it would all get swallowed up by the other. Thank you, Michelle. So instead, God says that each and every tribe should have their own day that will be the day of that tribe to bring their offering. And in fact, and if you this week's Torah reading, which happens to be the longest parsha of the entire year, the longest single parsha, because some weeks we have a double Torah reading, so those will be longer. But the longest single Torah reading of the entire year is this week's parsha, the parsha of Nasa. It has 176 verses. It's a long Torah reading. Now, it's interesting. It's also the same number of, by the way, that number is an easy number to remember because the longest tractate of Talmud, which is a tractate of Basra, has 176 pages, and the longest chapter of Tehillim, which is chapter 119, has 176 verses as well. Anyway, so it has a lot of verses. Part of why it's such a long parsha, I don't know the number offhand, but each one of the 12 tribes bring an offering for 12 days. On the first day, Nasi, the prince of the tribe of Yehuda, Nachshon Aminadab, brings his offering. He brings a silver bowl and he brings a cup of gold with like incense, and he brings 5 oxen. The Torah lists the whole the whole list of offerings he brings. There's probably 5 or 6 verses describing his offering. And then the Torah repeats the entire 6 verses again on day number 2. The only difference between day number 1 and day number 2 is the name of the prince and which tribe he represents on day number 2. So on day number 2, I'm going from memory, it's the tribe of Yisachar. Nisan ben Sur is the prince of the tribe of Yisachar, and he brings his silver spoon filled with incense and the bowl with the flour and the sheep and the bulls and the oxen, and the exact same offering as day number 1. And guess what? The Torah repeats all of the details of the offering on day number 3, and on day number 4, and on day number 5, and day number 6, and day number 7, and day number 8, and day number 9, day number 10, day number 11, day number 12. Sounds repetitive, but guess what? If you read the Torah this Shabbos, you'll be in synagogue, you're going to hear it gets very repetitive. And I go really fast because, like when you're repeating the same thing 12 times. So the obvious question is, why are we repeating the same thing 12 times? God could have just said, each one brought the same offering. On the first day, this prince brought so and so. The second day, he brought it. The third day, he brought it. 12 verses. And yet, what's the simple and very powerful, obvious answer? The offering of each prince, of each tribe, is unique and special in the eyes of God. And God wanted each one. Can you ask me a favor? If you go to my office, on the chair is the bag for the laptop. I forgot to bring the plug. Thank you. Need a plug, 1 second. Hopefully it's going to reach. I don't know if it's going to reach. You got it? Thank you. Now let's see if this will reach to this plug. If not, we need the extension cord, which is in the shoulder. 1 second. You see it all reach there? No, it won't reach. There's an extension cord on the TV screen, which is in the shoulder next to the stage. Thank you, making you run around. It's on the right side of the stage. Yeah, it's normally here, but they took it. There was an event in the show this morning. Okay, thank you all of you watching. I apologize for the making Michelle run around. Okay, let's see if we're live now. So, it seems to still be live. Let's see. Oh, we're back. Okay. Look at that. We're back on the same stream. Okay. Sorry about that delay. Those of you that are still staying loyal and watching, we're here. We're back. Okay. So the point is, thank you for your help, Michelle. The point is that every single tribe is valuable in and of itself. And therefore, God wants each and every tribe to have its own day when they are recognized independent of any other tribe and to have their day on the stage, if you will. Okay. So that's the introduction. If you're just joining now, you haven't missed any of the interesting stuff yet. You haven't missed the good stuff. Why knowing about the 10 tribes is important? Like, who cares today? We don't really know what tribe we're from. Why it's important. So, last week, we went through the entire history of how 10 tribes got lost. How did we lose them? The debate in the Talmud, in the Mishnah between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, if they're going to return, if they're not going to return. Rabbi Akiva said that they were lost. They were swallowed up by the nations. They won't be returning. Rabbi Eliezer says that they will be returning. But we discussed last week that there's many prophecies about the coming of Mashiach and the return of the lost tribes and etc. So that was all last week. It was fascinating. But now let's get to some of the even more fascinating stuff, which is where we've encountered members of the 10 lost tribes or have gotten regard or have had attempts of people to connect with the 10 lost tribes during the course of more modern history. Okay? So after the times of the Talmud, after the Mishnah, the trail, so to say, runs cold. And for a long time, the Jews living in Europe, in Babylonia, in Africa, in Morocco, in Egypt, in Syria, and Iraq, these countries, they have no contact with the Jews of the 10 lost tribes. And then one day, in the late 9th century, a man calling himself Eldad Hadani, remember that name? Eldad Hadani, which literally means Eldad, from the tribe of Dan. Dan is one of the 10 lost tribes. So this man, his name is Eldad from the tribe of Dan. He appeared in the Jewish community of today Tunisia. And he said he came from a land called Chavila, near the Sambatyon River. Remember last week we talked about the Sambatyon River, which is a river that runs 6 days a week. It's so intensely stormy and rocks flying from it and the waves are so intense that no one could dare try to cross it. On Shabbos, the river rests, doesn't do anything, which is why it's called Sambatyon from the word Shabbat, the Sabbath. And this was the famous myth and the legend or the story of the Sambatyon River. So he says he comes from the Sambatyon River. And he says that 4 of the 10 tribes live together. The tribes of Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And he says that he knows people from the tribes of Reuven, Yisachar, Zvul, and Ephraim and Asher. So he's saying, I know the other tribes, I know where they live. We live independently. And basically, Yisachar used to live with us. And then the tribe of Dan, I don't get too into the details, but it's a fascinating story. The tribe of Dan was there first in this land. And then the tribes of Naphtali, Gad, and Asher came together with Yisachar. And then Yisachar was making fun of them. There was some politics. And so Yisachar left because they were the sons of maids, whatever. Now, he knows a lot of the Torah. He knows Torah. And he says they start testing him. And he even has books like describing the laws of Shechita, describing the laws of sacrifices, things that are not even written, things that he has. But in their tradition, in their books, it says, these are the words we heard from Yoshua, who accepted it from Moshe, who received it from God. I mean, they don't have any of the rabbis or the Mishnah and the Talmud and all that because they were lost. They were lost. So all their traditions, everything that they have is all coming from Joshua. And that's their tradition. But he knows many, many laws. This is the guy that comes from a foreign land, keeping Torah, slaughtering animals, where Jews have been slaughtering animals, etc. And he describes how they were. He describes the whole story when the Jews were exiled from Babylonia and how they were crying before Hashem, how they cut off their thumbs in mourning when they heard about. They used to play music when they heard about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash because they were living far away. If you remember, they were exiled before the destruction of the temple. And then they don't have the Megillah. For example, they have Tanakh. They don't have the Megillah of these tribe of Dan because the Megillah of Esther happened later. That's, if you remember, I mentioned last week that Mordechai was called Yehudi, a Jew, because he's from the tribe of Yehuda. Either from the tribe of Binyamin, from the kingdom of Yehuda, rather. So he describes how his ancestors would tell them. Now, when they were living in Chavila and they heard about the temple being destroyed, it was like a mighty noise had risen and the earthquake had struck. And then they saw people coming surrounded by this river, throwing up stones, whatever. It's the whole story. And then, as I said, Issachar was taunting them, so Issachar left, and these other tribes came to live together where Dan had already been living from before. Now, the Jews of this area in Tunisia, in Quran, were very confused. Is this guy for real, or is he a fake? He's claiming to be one of the 10 lost tribes. He actually spoke a different dialect of Hebrew. He spoke Hebrew, but there were some words that were obviously different, and they tested him on the same words multiple times on different days. And they said, like, he had some words in the Torah, like a pigeon, that he had different words for, but when they asked him the same word, like they showed him a pigeon 5 days later, he used the same words. It wasn't just making up gibberish. He had a variance of Hebrew. So it's like 90% the same with his own unique. It was fascinating. So what do you do in such a situation? They asked the biggest rabbi alive at that time, who was Rabbi Tzemach Bar Chaim, who was the Gaon of Surah. He was living in Babylonia. He was the leader of world Jewry at that time. This is in the period of the Gaonim. If you know Jewish history, the period of the Gaonim, the leaders of Israel, of the Jewish people, were living in Babylonia, which was the main center of Torah learning at that time. And so they sent a letter to Rav Tzemach Gaon to get his opinion. Can we rely on this guy, Eldad Hadani? And what do you think he responds? So Rav Tzemach Gaon, who is the leader of the world Jewry, responds, and he says that Eldad is reliable, his tale is consistent with Jewish tradition, and he has, the fact that there's certain inaccuracies and certain things that are not correct and certain words that are different is just from the trials and tribulations of his travels and his journeys. And indeed, he says that this story about the descendants of Moshe coming down to the land of Dan and the land of Chavila is also found in the Targum of Yonasan ben Uziel. He brings a medrash that brings his version of the story and how Hashem says to Moshe that even though basically his Moshe had made a promise had asked, I don't want to get too distracted, but God told Moshe at the golden calf, go down, I'm going to destroy the Jewish people, make a new nation from you. Right? Remember that? And God, what did Moshe say to God? No, thank you. So as a result of that, God forgives the Jewish people. However, we know that whenever God says something, what he says has to come true. Has to come true. So once God had told Moshe, I'm going to make a new nation from you, even though he didn't keep the condition because he didn't destroy the Jewish people, but God had said something. So if God said something, it has to come to fruition. And so therefore, indeed, a great nation was destined to descend from Moshe, and this would become the people of Dan living in Chavila, because Dan was from the family of Moshe, whatever, because of Bnei Gershon. Gershon was called, he was a foreigner. So this idea that they were living in this place by the Sabbat River, and by the destruction of the tribes of Yisachar or whatever came and joined them, it all makes sense. And the Gaonim of the times in Babylonia accept that Eldad Hadani is indeed a member of the tribe of Dan. Okay? Now, I have to be honest and tell you that not all the rabbis agree with this. And for all of Jewish history, this story of Eldad Hadani would be debated if it's authentic or not. So just to give one example of each, if you open up a Talmud, right? You ever seen the inside of a Talmud? So whatever. On the inside you have the Rashi, we heard of him, and on the other side is Tosfos. Tosfos are the grandkids of Rashi. From the yeshiva of Rashi, the school of Rashi, primarily Rabbi Tam, whatever, not only his grandsons, but others, descendants of Rashi, students of Rashi. So in the very first Tosfos, the very first one, in the Tractate of Chulin, which deals with the laws of shechita, of slaughtering animals and kosher animals, etc., in the very first one, the intro to the tractate, Tosfos writes, he quotes a book called The Laws of Israel, Hilchos Eretz Yisrael, which is the book of kosher from Eldad Hadani. So it's quoted in Tosfos. He's quoting this book called Hilchos Eretz Yisrael. There is no book in the Talmud called Hilchos Eretz Yisrael. He's quoting a book of the laws of shechita that's a tradition from the tribe of Dan that they got through their tradition straight back to Joshua from Moses at Mount Sinai, which is not written anywhere. It's not written in the Torah. And yet they also had the same traditions of Shechita that we have. Okay? So he quotes that. That's a very reliable source. On the flip side, just to give you one flip side, thank you for the blessings online. On the flip side, the Ibn Ezra, for example, is one very famous, authentic rabbi. He's in, if you open up a Chumash Mikros, he's in the Ibn Ezra, and he writes that Eldad Hadani was an imposter. His writings are a fantasy. He writes clearly to never believe such kind of foolish works, and never like the book, the likes of fantasy books and fiction like Eldad Hadani and others like him. He put into the category of imposters and charlatans of history that made up stuff just to get famous. So we clearly have, like anything in Judaism, we have a clear debate if Eldad Hadani is legit, if he's for real or not. But he's the first real, so to say, for centuries, a link to the 10 lost tribes. I'm going to jump out of chronological order here because I want to just modern times. I know it's going to be more interesting. So many, and I know some people watching this last week were commenting about Ethiopian Jews. Right? Are Ethiopian Jews kosher? Are they Jewish? They're not Jewish. It's a big debate, a big discussion. The Ethiopian Jews come from a land called Kush, which is really Sudan, whatever. Sudanese Jews also. Kush is Ethiopia, Sudan. This is where the tribe of Eldad Hadani comes from, this area. And the Radvaz asked this question. He was asked, the Radvaz, or the David ibn Zimra, very, very famous rabbi, great halachic authority. He was asked this question: if those who come from Kush are from the tribe of Dan, as they say they are, and the Radvaz, David ibn Zimra, says, yes, they're undoubtedly Jews, but they're probably mamzerim. You know what a mamzer is? An illegitimate child. An illegitimate child. Meaning if someone's born out of wedlock, someone is born from an not just born from a non-marriage, but a married woman who commits adultery, that child would be considered a mamzer that would not be allowed to marry to the Jewish people. So he writes that based on their traditions, that these Jews, Bnei Israel Jews, that they have from the tribe of Dan, and from these tribes, Yisachar, Zvulun, Gad, Naphtali, Dan, Naphtali, these traditions that they have, they know how to do a marriage. Their marriage is binding, but they don't know how to do a proper divorce. So therefore, there were probably women that were married and went kosher. There were two witnesses there, but their divorce was not good. And then they married again, and they had children in second marriages that were mamzerim. And therefore, that corrupted the children of a mamzer, also mamzer, etc. And therefore, you cannot marry into them because their yichus, their lineage, is for sure corrupted from over the course of time. That's what he writes. Now, based on this, in 1973, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, former Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel, wrote a landmark ruling, if you will. Like, the Supreme Court, you have like landmark rulings, like Roe v. Wade, like a landmark ruling. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was asked this question about a lot of Ethiopian Jews, Sudanese Jews, from Kush, who were claiming to be what's called Bnei Yisrael Jews. Now, Bnei Yisrael is literally, if you remember last week's class, I told you that if you look through the Torah, what were the Jews always called? Bnei Yisrael, sons of Israel, Israelites. It was only when the Jews went to Persia that Mordechai went from being an Israelite to being a Yehudi, or as we say in English, a Jew. And that's because, I explained last week, he was from the kingdom of Judah, as opposed to those that are for the other 10 tribes who are from the kingdom of Israel. But these Jews are the original Bnei Yisrael Jews. They were never the kingdom of Yehuda. They were always Israelites. So they still have the title of Bnei Yisrael, sons of Israel, Bnei Israel. And you have them in Cochin, India. You have them in China. You have them in Japan. And many different places in the world where Jewish communities have been found to have Jews that claim to be Bnei Yisrael Jews. I can tell you a minute about I was in India. I'll tell you a story in a minute. But so anyway, there's a large community of Jews, of Ethiopians who claim to be Jewish, who have traditions of Judaism going back for many, many generations. They're missing a lot of it, but they have Jewish traditions for sure. And they're claiming to be the Bnei Yisrael Jews that were never heard of before. And there's no like oral tradition in the rabbis and the in halacha. No one's ever heard of them before. So in 1973, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef gave a landmark ruling that these Ethiopian Jews are halachic Jews. Big ruling. It was tremendous. Take that on his shoulders. It's a tremendous responsibility. He made a ruling, and he said, and that's what I'm telling you what I said to you. He based his ruling on the Gaonim. The fact that Rav Tzemach Gaon sent a letter back to the Jewish community in what's today Tunisia, saying that this Jew, Eldad Hadani, he's a Jew. He is indeed from the tribe of Dan. So Rav Ovadia Yosef says the Gaonim for sure knew what they were talking about. They did their homework. The Gaonim were the great leaders of the Jewish people at that time. And then he quotes this letter of the Radvaz, where he writes that they're Mamzerim, but they're Jews. And therefore, he gave a rule of the Jews. Not only that, he publicly pushed for the Knesset to accept them as Jews and to allow them to make Aliyah and to immigrate to Israel, and to any Jew, anyone in the world has a right of return. Right? Any Jew, anyone in the world automatically can get citizenship in Israel. And therefore, in 1975, because of this ruling of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, that these Jews of Ethiopia, which is a descendant of Cush from Eldad Hadani, are to be accepted as Jews, and the Israeli government formally allowed Ethiopian Jews to emigrate and to get Israeli citizenship, etc. Now, again, I have to tell you that not all the rabbis in Israel agreed with this. It was a very daring rule. He really went out on the limb because he had some sources. It's not like he just made it up out of thin air. I shared with you the sources for why he allowed it, but many rabbis did not accept them, and they require Ethiopian Jews to go through a gerus l'chumra. A gerus l'chumra means a conversion to be careful, like a stricter. So it's not that we're saying you're not Jewish and we're converting you as a non-Jew to a Jew, but we're not comfortable that you're really Jewish. You go to the mikveh just in case, to go to the mikveh and go through a conversion process before you can be considered fully Jewish. I don't know how. It's not just a mikvah. It's for sure a learning process to accept the laws. I don't know if they're as strict with Ethiopians because you can be more strict. I don't know how the Rabbanut in Israel works. In general, the Rabbanut of Israel is very strict when it comes to conversions in general. So many Americans go through conversion in America only to find out that the Rabbanut in Israel doesn't accept them, and so I'm not privy to the details how it works. I will tell you a personal story. I was in India in 2008, summer of 2007. Summer of 2007, me and my cousin Yossi Gansberg, we went to Bangalore, India for a month, and we started what would eventually become a full-time Chabad presence in Bangalore until COVID. Unfortunately, it no longer exists. COVID destroyed it. Yeah, sadly, because COVID, there's no local Jews living there. It was all foreigners, Israelis, Russians, whatever, that were there. And when COVID came, everyone left. China was, India, these places were not places to be. And everyone left, and the rabbi had nothing to do. And he couldn't make it, and he closed up shop. And Rabbi Rifkin, whatever, and I actually met him at the Ohel. Surprisingly, I didn't even know who he was. I was at the Ohel once, sending a letter. He was sitting right next to me. And I don't even know how we ended up talking to each other. I mean, he's a Chabad rabbi in Bangalore, and I and he knew whatever. And I joined his Chai Club, and I was a support of his, small, but till COVID, and then unfortunately it didn't last. But why I say the story? So we met a Jew from Cochin, India, a Bnei Yisrael Jew, a Jew that claims now Cochin, India, is an amazing story in and of itself. They have one of the oldest Jewish communities. It's not alive really anymore, but they have a shul from the times of the Second Temple. And to the credit of the Indian people, in 2,000 years, there has not really been anti-Semitism in India. Look at where Jews have been throughout the world, the anti-Semitism, the attacks, the explosions. In India, that hasn't happened. And they've been able to live in peace. So there's one incident in 2,000 years, but generally speaking, they lived in peace with the Indians for millennia. And that's for the credit of the Indian people. So in Cochin, you have a known Jewish community. Then you have Bnei Yisrael Jews, other Jews that moved to India that were there. And so we called Rabbi Holzberg. Hashem should avenge his blood, and he was murdered by terrorists. Rabbi Holzberg was murdered in Mumbai, India. by terrorists in November of 2008. I was in the Chabad house. I was attacked in the Nariman house. We spent Shabbos there. We slept in the Taj Hotel, which was a major attack. One of the places was attacked, and we were there. We ate. We spent Shabbos in the Chabad house. That was where they held the hostages, and it was 2 days that they were there, whatever it was, till the Indian SWAT team went in and basically killed everyone. It wasn't like the Israeli teams go in, they get the hostages out alive. Didn't happen with the Indian SWAT team. But anyway, the point is, so we called Rabbi Holtzberg to ask him, what should this guy is a Bnei Yisrael Jew? Is he Jewish? Is he not Jewish? We didn't know. So Rabbi Holtzberg told us, and I'm just telling you what we were told to do when we were yeshiva students in India. He said the Rabbanut accepts him as Jewish, so you should put on tefillin with him. You should, meet him, learn with him, whatever. So that's what we were advised by Rabbi Holtzberg to do, to put on tefillin with him and learn. So that's my personal. I've met and prayed together with a Bnei Yisrael Jew in India, not in Ethiopia, but that's very cool. And they have a tradition, just like we have a tradition going back over to Moses, they do too, which is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. But again, not everyone says that these are the 10 lost tribes. It's also the Bnei Yisrael Jews, not all of them are from the same story. So the Jews in Ethiopia are not the same as the Jews in India per se. And I don't know exactly. And those also Jews in China. Anyway, that's the first main story of the 10 lost tribes. Okay. Then we're going to go a little bit further. You have some smaller stories. Like you have a Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela, who lived in the 12th century. He wrote a book called Masot Binyamin. He was a Marco Polo. Before Marco Polo was Marco Polo, there was a Jewish rabbi who did the same thing. He spent 15 years, traveling the world. Just traveling the world. And he wrote many books about his journeys called Masot Binyamin, The Journeys of Benjamin. That's his book. Hello, Henry. So he wrote a book, The Journeys of Benjamin, and he traveled all over the world, writing many stories about his travels. He was a very popular writer. He did a good job selling his books. He was very widely popular. And in his books, he references the 10 lost tribes twice, where he talks about them, saying he met people that knew them, but he never actually, that they still exist and people know where they are, but he never actually managed to cross the Sambatu River and actually meet them. He writes about them. Whatever, that's just a small thing. Now we come to the next main story. The next main story is in the year 1524. So now we're in the 16th century. That was in the 12th century. Now we're in the year 1524. A man calling himself David Haruveni appears. Now, okay, what tribe is he from? Exactly, Reuven. So David claims to be from the tribe of Reuven. He comes from the desert of Chavor, which is a place that was also mentioned in one of the prophecies, in one of the verses. He comes from the desert of Chavor. And he says that where he lives is somewhere in Africa. The tribe of Reuven, Gad, and half, it's not in Africa. I don't know exactly where it is. The tribe of Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh lived. If you remember when the Jews crossed the Jordan River, some tribes stayed on the other side of the Jordan River. Reuven, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh. Now, this David Haruveni, he has a very, very beautiful story to share. What's his story? His brother Joseph is the king of these three tribes. They have their own kingdom, their own army. They're constantly fighting against all the Arab kings that are fighting against them and all that. And he says that his brother Joseph, who is a king, has appointed him as a general of the military. And he sent his brother on a mission to convince the rulers of Europe to join forces with this Jewish army to invade the Muslim-dominated Middle East and to liberate the land of Israel from Islamic rule. Okay. Now, you have to realize, where's the Jewish people holding at this point in history? Let's give you a little bit of psychology to appreciate. The Jewish people in the 1500s are as oppressed as could be. What happened in 1492? We were kicked out of Spain. We have no army. We have no one to defend us. We have Marranos. The Jews are being burnt alive and being killed by the Inquisition all the time. You have small communities which are largely refugees. The communities in Portugal, in Lisbon, etc. They're overflowing with refugees who ran from Spain where the Inquisition had expelled them or tried to kill them. They're oppressed. They're poor. And all of a sudden, this guy appears and he says, "There's a Jewish army. The Jewish king. He's fighting wars against the Muslims. He's fighting wars against those that are fighting against God." And he convinces the Christians the European armies, kings, who are also anti-Muslim, to join forces against a common enemy. And he's very charismatic. He's very successful. He even meets with Pope Clement the Seventh several times. He gives him letters of recommendation to the kings of Portugal, to the kings of England, and he actually becomes very influential, going around meeting with generals, militaries, and kings, building together a coalition who will fight together with the Jewish army to conquer Israel. For the Jews, this is like Mashiach. Literally, Mashiach is coming. Because you have to, again, we have to understand, like, just like the Jews in 1948, which is, I don't get distracted with Zionism, but 1948, the Jews had just come from the Holocaust. And now we have our own army, we have our own country, our own land. The thrill of that is unbelievable. It's, it's a sense of independence that we can fight for ourselves. And the Jews in the 1500s, who have been exiled from their lands of hundreds of years that are oppressed, and now being told that we have a Jewish king and the Jewish army that's successfully fighting the enemies and creating a coalition, was messianic. It was messianic. And when were the Jews expelled from Spain? 1492. That was the expulsion of Spain. But that was just like the end of like over 100 years of the Inquisition. And the Inquisition was very powerful. All the stories of Marranos who were hiding their Judaism and being burnt by the auto de fe's, that's in the 1500s. And many Jews had with nothing more than the shirt on their back. They couldn't take their money. They couldn't take their business. They couldn't take their homes. They built a successful, they're very wealthy, the golden era of Spain. Then we're going to get carried away on this too. And then I still have more stories to share with you. But whatever. The point is, it was a very dark time for the Jews. Financially, physically. Okay. And now you have a guy who's promising freedom. What?
What is it not?
So the golden era spent in the 12, 1300s, 1400s was a good time for the Jews. Okay, so anyway, guess what happens? At some point, he claims to be Mashiach, he claims to be Messiah, and he starts causing many conversos, where Jews that had converted to Christianity outwardly and publicly, to return to Judaism because Mashiach is coming. And he gets a whole following after him. He's the general of the Jewish army. And many Jews start becoming openly proud Jews again. So guess what happens? He eventually falls out of favor from the authority. The English king, Charles IV of the Holy Roman Empire, got angry, and he was handed over to the Inquisition in Spain, where he disappeared. Most likely he was killed by the Inquisition in Spain, and that was the end of David Haruveni, who had been promising a Jewish army with fighting in Chavor with his brother Joseph, the king of the tribes of Reuben. And again, whether or not it's true or not, it's hard to know. No one ever saw the army. Okay. Next story of the 10 lost tribes is the Native Americans. They discover America. Okay. Now, when they discover America, you know what else they discover? Lost people that no one ever knew of before, who share some tradition with Torah. They share some traditions with Torah. And there's different families, there are different tribes, different traditions. Some that actually do the laws of Yibum, of marrying a woman that passes away, marrying her brother, the brother marries the widow. And there was a rabbi at the time, his name was Rabbi Menashe ben Israel. He was born in 1604. Okay, so a little after the David Haruveni, half a century later. And he was born to a family of Marranos, family of Jews, very famous family that had come from Spain and Portugal, who had accepted Christianity outwardly, but privately were practicing Jews. And his father was a Kappa in Auto de Fe, and the family escaped to Amsterdam. His father was killed by the Inquisition and burned by an Auto de Fe, and then the family escaped to Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, Jews were allowed to be Jews. And Menashe became a rabbi of the Portuguese community congregation in Amsterdam in 1622. He founded the city's first Hebrew printing press in 1620, publishing works in Hebrew, in Latin, in Spanish, and Portuguese. He became very influential. Now, this Rabbi Menashe ben Israel was a rabbi of Portugal, of Amsterdam. He meets a man called Antonio Rosinos. Antonio Rosinos was actually a Jew. His Hebrew name was Aaron Levi. He was also a Marrano. And he had just returned from the new land of America. And Antonio Razinos, who was a famous sailor or traveler, tells Rabbi Menashe ben Israel how he met tribes that are Jews. And he tells them they even greet him with the Shema. They know the Shema. Imagine, there's Native American Indians who know the Shema. This is what this is what Antonio Razinos tells Rabbi Menashe ben Israel. Now, at the same time, they also discovered Jews living in China. China was also a land that had been totally isolated from Europe completely. No one knew about the Chinese, and all of a sudden discovered the Chinese. And there also they saw Jews in China. And so Rabbi Menashe ben Israel becomes convinced that this is the sign of the Mashiach coming. Because what's the prophecy of Mashiach? It says the Mashiach will only come when the Jews are scattered over all four corners of the earth. Then God will come and gather us from all four corners of the world. And now we're discovering that there's all these new lands. And guess what? There's Jews there. There's Jews in America saying the Shema together with their war. I don't know. They do their the war dances. Shema. And then you have Jews in China that are Jews. You have Jews all over, and the Jews have been exiled now after the Spain. The Jews were very centralized. Jews are traveled all over in all these countries. And he becomes convinced that the prophecies of Mashiach are coming true because Jews are spread all over the world. Now, he actually has an agenda. Menashe ben Israel becomes a very prolific promoter of the idea that the Bnei Israel tribes are in America, where we are now, in the land of America, in the Americas, both the North and South. And he actually has a very smart plan. He uses this argument that there's Jews in America to convince Oliver Cromwell of England to re-allow the Jews into Britain. Now, in 1290, Jews had been expelled from England. And for the few hundred years, there were no Jews allowed to live in Great Britain. So he has the problem of Menashe ben Israel. If Jews are living in India and in China, on the east side of the world, and we have Jews living in the Western Hemisphere and in the Americas, so guess what? Mashiach can come with one problem. There's one place where there's no Jews. In England. England has no Great Britain, not only England, the whole out of Scotland, whatever was part of Great Britain at that time in the 1600s, there's no Jews there. And so the Christians also want Mashiach to come. They also want the ingathering of the exiles and all that. They also have their own version. And they're also, Christians become very into this whole thing, the 10 lost tribes, becomes very, very powerful, already from David Haruveni and the Pope. And so now he convinces Oliver Cromwell to allow the Jews to come back in, and he creates a whole movement about the 10 lost tribes. So that's the next story. Now, today, most rabbis don't accept the Native Americans as being the 10 lost tribes, as being Jewish. But by the way, it's very interesting. So some people said that the 10 lost tribes are the Native Americans, they're Jews. Some said they deserve. Some Christians use the same verses to say, what was the 10 lost tribes were punished by God to be destroyed. So by us killing the Native Americans, we're fulfilling the prophecy. You can take the Bible any way you want. Anyway. Now, the next story quickly is about Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov. So all these people, by the way, so some of these people are people that come and say, we're tribes, right? The two main ones is Eldad Adani and this guy Ruvain, David Haruveni. These are the two main guys. Then you have rabbis that promote this idea. The main rabbis that we have is Rabbi Menashe ben Israel, and another rabbi called Yisrael Mishklov. Now, what's interesting about Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov is that he's a very mainstream rabbi, very mainstream Orthodox. He's actually a student of the Vilna Gaon. Heard of the Vilna Gaon, right? The Vilna Gaon was one of the greatest leaders of Lithuanian Jewry. He lived at the same time of the Alter Rebbe. He lived the 17th century. And one of his students, he sent students to go live in the land of Israel. And one of his youngest students, who became one of the leaders of the Vilna students of the Litvish community in Tzfat, was this young student, Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov. He was a scholar, he was an author, he was a respected student of the Vilna Gaon, and he became in charge of the Rosh Yeshiva. He became the Rosh Yeshiva of the yeshiva in Tzfat. They had a community in Tzfat of Prushim. Prushim are ascetics. They don't live. They live very like secluded lives, just studying Torah day and night. They don't do anything but study Torah. He was a leader of the Prussian, like the holiest sect of the students of the Vilna of Gaon. And they were studying in Tzfat. He became the Rosh Yeshiva, and he became responsible to raise money for them. So he started traveling extensively to fundraise money to sustain the yeshiva and the community in Tzfat. He travels all over, and during his journeys, he runs into a traveler, and he introduces, and he finds that there's 10 lost tribes living in Yemen, etc. So I actually read through a little bit of the letter now. I found it's on the letter he writes. He sends a student of his to go and meet these 10 lost tribes. He knows where they are based on people he had met in his journey, in his travel, his fundraising. And the actual letter is a very long letter. It's like 12 chapters long or something. I just started reading it. It's on Safari. I was reading it now before the class started. So the letter is dated. I have the Rosh Chodesh Mar Cheshvan of the year 5591, which is in English is 1830. Written by the land of Israel and the holy city of Yerushalayim and Hebron and Tzfat. So he says he's sending this letter in the hands of a messenger to the dwellers of the Bnei Israel, the land of Israel, who abide by the Torah of Moshe, to our the children of Israel, the sons of Yitzchak, sons of Yaakov, whatever, holy and pure, the Bnei Moshe, the sons of Moshe. I already told you about the tradition that God promised Moshe to have his own children, who lived behind the across the river Shabbatyon, the Sambatyon, and who pledge allegiance to the king of Israel, who sits upon the mighty throne, who rules over the 10 tribes, whose settlement is in the land beyond the rivers of Cush, who according to their banners, who camp according to their flags, tribe of Dan, Naphtali, of Gad, of Asher, of Yisachar, etc., etc. And then across from them, the tribe of Zebulun at Mount Freon, and across from them, the tribe of Reuben. He's like describing the whole in this letter where he thinks that they live based on what he was told by Israel. Accept abundant greetings from your brethren, the children of Israel, the last remnant of the tribes of Judah and of Benjamin and of Levi, dispersed among the four corners of the earth. It's a very, very long letter. Anyway, what did you read in this letter? Again, it's like 12 chapters. I only read the first, right? So I'm taking one part of it. And he says, as our rabbis have told us, that in the year 4640, which is 780, we talked about this, a man righteous and upright from the tribe of Dan, Eldad Hadani, quoting Eldad Hadani in his letter, testified of their greatness and grandeur, their righteousness and their holiness, saying that Hashem has helped them remain secure in their settlement, safe from the surrounding nations, and that the ways of our holy Torah are clear to them, as transmitted by Moshe, our teacher at Sinai, and that they have their own courts where they do capital cases and civil cases, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, he clearly accepts Eldad Hadani as not only a Jew, but all of his stories about a separate kingdom that's still hidden away, where Jews are living independently, where Jews are studying Torah and with kings and with an army and safe and secure, where no armies, where no enemies are attacking them or fighting or destroying them, where they're still religious and still studying and still following the laws, it's still happening. It's clear that he believes this. He's sending his main student, I forgot the name, later on I didn't copy it, to go meet them. And actually the letter, he asked for 4 things. So he asked that these religious, he's convinced that they're very righteous, holy Jews. They're a straight tradition back to Moshe. And they should pray for the Jewish community in Israel. That they should send someone with smicha from Moshe to give smicha to them. Smicha is the tradition of the rabbi to student, the power to judge cases. Today we don't have a real smicha. I got smicha, but it's not the smicha of Joshua. Well, let's leave it at that. But he was hoping that they still had a direct chain, unbroken chain of smicha, and therefore they could give smicha to us. So he wants that. He asks for money to support the community in Tzfat and in Israel, and he wants a report. He wants them to send back someone, either written or someone from their community, to come to visit us so we can learn more about like how you guys are doing. So this student goes with his letter, and the letter is very, very long because he writes to these communities a whole history of the Jewish people from the destruction of the temple and the Jews going to exile and in the lands of Ashkenaz and the lands of Germany and in France and in Spain. And he like describes, he's assuming that just like we don't know much about their history of the last few thousand years, they don't know about our history. So he writes a whole long Megillah Very interesting. Anyway, nothing comes from it. This messenger does not lost tribes where Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov had been told he would find them. So he had a whole thing where they were. The rabbi went and couldn't find them. Anyway, that's that story. And finally, we have those are the stories. So where do we stand today? Where do we stand today? What do we believe? What does Chabad believe? What does the modern day Jew believe? Are they there? Is there a river Sabachon? A river that rages 6 days a week, that you can't pass it, then Shabbos it's calm and all that. We have people that have claimed to have lived there and to have seen it. Eldon Adani claimed to have been able to get over it. People talked about it. So the Maharal of Prague, you know the Maharal of Prague? Rabbi Yehuda Loew. He was the chief rabbi of the city of Prague. He writes a book called Netzach Yisrael. He's a very, very famous author. He's a big Kabbalist. He's before the Baal Shem Tov, but in Hasidic world, he's a very, very accepted and a very reliable source. So he explains that he's a big, big philosopher also. Big rabbi, but also a big theologian and philosopher. And he says the Jewish people will never discover the tribes by searching for them. Trying to find them is not going to work. Why not? Because the exile of the 10 tribes is a divine decree. And therefore, until Mashiach comes, God will not rescind his decree. Even if we were just to know where they are, would already be some measure of reunification. And God has decreed that there should not be any reunification of the. Remember last week I read you the prophecy of the tribe of the stick of Judah, the stick of Joseph, becoming united into one stick. If you might have read you that prophecy. So that's a prophecy which not happen until Mashiach comes. And therefore, this is a big idea in the religious world, Chabad, but in that kibbutz galuyos, so the ingathering of the exiles, is not something that man has the power to do. The ingathering of the exiles is something that God and only God can do and will do at the time that God wants to do it. So the fact that Israel today has Jews coming from many countries and moving to Israel, beautiful, it's amazing, and it's special. But the call that the ingathering of the exiles is incorrect. Because that's something only God can do. That's what the Maharal writes. And therefore, when the Gemara tells us, we read last week, that they were lost, they were swallowed up amongst the nations, they were behind the river and they're swallowed up, the Maharal says that when you say that they're swallowed up, it means it's as if they don't exist anymore. If you had like let's say you had a tea, right? Now you swallow the tea. Does the tea still exist? In a different form. So it's in your stomach, but to say there's a cup of tea that exists is not true anymore. There's no longer a cup of tea. This cup was a little bit of the cup. There's no cup of tea left. Even though theoretically the H2O, whatever, is somewhere in my esophagus, somewhere in my belly button, I don't know exactly. But it doesn't really exist. It's been swallowed up. It's lost. It's not in a separate identity anymore. There's no cup of tea still existing. So too, when it says that the 10 tribes were swallowed up by the nations, Rekiva said that they were swallowed, they were intermarried, and they became assimilated, and they were lost because they got us. The Maharal say that they became like they don't exist anymore. Not that they exist and they're hidden. They only exist in potential. They don't actually exist in reality. Just like the cup of that. No, I mean today we understand that things exist, that we can't see them, we can't touch them, we can't. But we understand that they exist in potential. And when it says that God will bring out the tribe, when Mashiach will come, it means then when Mashiach will come, God will transform this potential into a reality, which is the idea of bringing forth fruit, whatever can. And that's why they were separated, behind the Sambatyon River. What's the Sambatyon River? There's no Sambatyon River, he said. Jews living in the 1200s, the 1400s, the 1500s, to them didn't make sense. There's a river that rages 6 days a week. We don't know where it is. We've never seen it. And in that river, there's another land where Jews live. Of course, there were explorers going out all the time discovering new lands. Right? We discovered America. We have Christopher Columbus, and you have the different all different kind of expeditions trying to find new lands. But today, there's no land that hasn't been seen by. We have satellites, we have radar, we have everything. There's no hidden land that we don't know about today. There's no unknown river. By the way, Menashe ben Israel said that the Sambatyon River is the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean is the Sambatyon River. Today we know, today you can't say that. So we're from the Samajri River. The Maral thinks not. The Maral, again, the rabbi said that he was real. But definitely there's a theory that no, God swallowed them up. The Samajri River is a metaphor. It's a statement of something that's not, it's not a physical river. It exists in a spiritual form. It exists in a there's many things that exist in a spiritual form that are not tangible. They're not physical, that you can say, here on the map at longitude and latitude of, 82. Oh, that's where the Sambatri River starts. There's no such a thing. There's no physical place on the map for a physical river called the Sambatri River. And there's no place on the map where there's a hidden land it says that they exist. They were totally swallowed up, meaning that they exist in the potential way. Again, Rabbi Kiva said they're still. He said no, they're there by an external. Mashiach will come, and the land will bring them forth, like a tree coming forth. That when you have a seed in the ground, right? Is there a tree in the ground? No, but in potential there is. A whole beautiful mango tree or an apple you can grow from the ground. So when you put the seed in potential, there's already an apple tree there, but it's only in potential. It's not actually a tree. So to the 10 lost tribes in the Sambatri River, it only exists in a spiritual form, in the metaphor. However, whether they do exist in some remote, impenetrable place, or they exist on the potential, or they were swallowed up, they were assimilated to another nation, there's things that are actually descendants of these tribes, but they're totally lost to the Jewish people because they become so assimilated and so intermarried into other nations that we don't even know that they exist anymore. Regardless, we have a clear prophecy from Isaiah, and there will be on that day, Yitaka b'shofar gadol, that God will blow the great, or Elijah rather, will blow the great shofar. And those who were lost in the land of Assyria. Assyria is the king that destroyed Sancherib, was the king of Assyria. The other kings that were the ones that destroyed the kingdom of the north of Israel and took the Jews into slavery. As we said, they would mix up the people. The people who lived in one land, they moved to another land. And the people who lived in the other land, they moved to this land. This way you wouldn't fight for your independence back because it's not even your land anymore. You're in some other person's land, some other home. So those that were lost, those that were lost in the land of Ashur, those that were exiled will return back to Israel. And they will bow down, they'll prostrate themselves before the Lord on the mountain, the holy mountain in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. So the prophecy is clear that they will come, when Mashiach will come, and will blow this great shofar. And at that time, all of those that were lost in the land of Assyria, which is the land north of the kingdom of the north of Israel, which is the 10 tribes of Israel, will be returned, will come back to Israel. They will once again bow down before Hashem in the Holy Land, in Yerushalayim. God willing, it should be very, 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 very soon. The Mashiach will be here, and all those Jews that were lost to us, whether living in China and Ethiopia, wherever they are, lost totally. They're living in, living in somewhere in the Americas, wherever they are, should be returned to come back, God willing, very, very soon. Okay, my friends, that is the story of 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. And if they exist in reality or in potential, where they exist, how they exist, but most importantly, we can't do anything about it either way. That's why it's just some of the mysteries. Because it's not something we're meant to know about. It's something we're meant to accept that God, we have to work to bring Mashiach. And when we make the world a place, a worthy enough place, that God's presence can be felt in the world, that's the day that all of Israel is going to be reunited and brought back as whole as one nation. Okay, my friends, that's the story. Thank you all you watching online. Good evening. Yes, I'm glad these people found it interesting. It's fascinating. Even myself, I didn't know a lot of this till. You don't like the ending, huh? Very intriguing. There's an Indian Jews in Arizona. Okay, very informative. Thank you. Thank you, Carmen. What? No, you have to have faith in God, and God will bring it back. It's a cliffhanger. All the Jews are living on the cliffhanger, waiting with bated. When is the moment when God will finally reveal himself? And as we just read, blow that great shofar and bring back all of those that were lost in the land of Israel and bring them back to our homeland. And guess what? We don't know the answer. The answer, we know the answer. The answer is when there was a rabbi, I forgot who, he went to go meet Mashiach. Someone told Mashiach was sitting like a leper, tying his bandages, sitting by the gates of the city. He went to the gates. He found the guy who was bandaging and unbandaging his bandages. So he said to him, "When are you coming?" She said, "Today." He's very excited. Anyway, the day goes by and he didn't come. Said, "I don't know if it was Elijah." He said to, or I don't know who was sent him. So he said, "I'm disappointed." He lied to me. He said, "He's coming today." He didn't come. So he said to him, he said, "Today." He meant Hayom la'asosa. The verse says, "Today is to do the work." He said, Hayom. He meant today is the day of work. Tomorrow will be the when Mashiach come today. If we do the work of today, Mashiach will come today. If we don't do the work, then it won't be today. So the answer really depends on us. Thank you, Shira. I'm glad that you enjoyed. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Corrine. Thank you, Joe. I'm glad you all enjoyed it. Listen, it's up to us, my friends. We are the ones that write the end of the story. We are the ones that write the end of the story. We are not, because we have a clear tradition of our family going back through the known community of the Jewish people. No, yeah, me too. What do you mean you don't?
I don't know my history. You know your history. You can track your history.
Yeah, but if you know the otherwise, it's part of the community. As long as the person is part of the community, there. Yes, I could track my personal family back. I don't know, 8, 9 generations on both my mother's side and my father's side. My mother comes from the Bach, from the Bayis Chadash, who was a Yale circus who lived in Krakow, Poland, in I think the 1600s, 1700s. I don't know exactly when. My father's side, my grandfather's grandfather was born. His grandfather's father, I think his name was Baptist. He was born in the city of Chedrin in Russia. It's a colony of Hasidim, times of the second Chabad Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, that we can track back, that we know. And he was born into a Hasidic family, so we don't. My grandfather doesn't know the name of his grandfather's father's father, but he was most likely a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe, based on the year that his grandfather's father was born. Anyway, yeah. Okay, my friends. Laila Tov. We shall see you all next week. Actually, yeah. And Shavuos is coming. You'll see me on Tuesday.